Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for the next session of our Get Certified DP600 series. My name's Anna, I'll be your producer for this session. I'm an event planner for Reactor, joining you from Redmond, Washington. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our moderators and presenters to answer live. Our session is being recorded. It will be available to view on demand right here on the Reactor channel. With that, I'd love to turn it over to our speakers for today. Thank you so much for joining.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to talk about the data warehouse today. So this is the DP600 series, which for those of you who are new to the channel, it's the Fabric Analytics Engineer exam. So we're going to tell you in this series about how you can go about getting certified. A little bit about me. You probably can tell from the accent. I am from Australia. Yep, I'm coming to you from the future. So I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. I'm also a certified trainer. I love talking about all things data and AI. My day job is data analytics for a global consulting company, and my spare time is traveling around the world talking to all of you about data. And what about yourself, Chris?
Well, this is me. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, as are you. I think you were too humble to mention that. Yeah, I'm here in North Texas today, so it's still Wednesday for me. I know you're, as always, ahead of the game. So yeah, anyone, let us know where you're joining us in from. Let us know whether it's Wednesday or Thursday for you, or Tuesday, hopefully not. If there is, you've got some problems. Now let's see, we've got a couple other people joining us today. We've got Mike and Taylor in the chat. They're going to take all your questions. Excuse me. They're going to answer them, really well, and maybe they'll throw a couple of interesting ones our way. But just take advantage of the fact that the four of us are here live, interacting with you, and we're here to help you pass your DP600 exam.
Absolutely. And this is not the first one in the series, this is the second in the series. So we're going to talk about Warehouse. The earlier series talked about Fabric fundamentals. Coming up, you're going to have semantic models in Power BI. And then don't forget, we've got monthly sessions as well. And then last but not least, real-time intelligence, Fabric security, and administration. And just a reminder, we are live, so do put your questions in the chat. There's a lot to learn, a lot to take in. It's being recorded, so you can watch us back later if you want to recap on what we did. And I see we've got people from all over the world. We've got some from Auckland, some from Florida. It's amazing. Thank you for joining us, everyone, today. And talking about those monthly data days, so these are a monthly one. So the one you're watching today is all about DP600, but on top of that, we're doing a monthly session about different content. So the next one's going to be about the coding languages, and these are the languages that you can use within Fabric. So think PySpark, Spark SQL, Python, all the things, even R. We might even talk a little bit about DAX and M as well. But come join that session. They are monthly. Register, check out the QR code, and we will see you there in a few short weeks.
All right. You might also be on the lookout for these free hands-on workshops called Fabric Analyst in a Day. Some of these are virtual, some of these are in person, but follow the link here and go find out if you're getting started, if you're maybe an intermediate user wanting to round out skills in the parts of Fabric you don't use every day. This is a great workshop for you to attend.
Yeah, and even hassle your partners. Microsoft partners deliver this training as well. So reach out to your partner network and see if they can deliver it for your organization. The next one, if you've not heard of this, the Fabric User Panel. So a lot of companies, their partners, they get involved in previews, they get to talk to Microsoft product team people. Maybe you have attended a conference and you get to attend them. But what if none of those opportunities are something that you can do? This one is one you can't. This is the Fabric User Panel, gives you direct access to talk to the PMs or project managers, program managers, and product managers who are working on the features. You can talk to some of the UI designers about the experience, talk to some of the engineers about how the functionality works, participate in upcoming research. You can influence the roadmap for the product. If there's something you don't like, why not let them know that you don't like it? And here's some suggested improvements. If there's a feature you love, let them know about that too. They want to hear the good, the bad, the ugly. They want to build the best product for all the users out there in the market. So do check out that link. You can go to the aka.ms/fabric user panel/live, register your details, and look forward to engaging in the Fabric user panel.
And we know a lot of you are here because you're looking for, insights, tips, tricks about taking that DP600 exam. And great, we have another round of free vouchers. You can also take the DP700. Request your voucher today. I think you have to, excuse me, prove that you've gone through a few Learn modules, and then you really want to request this when you're ready, because you'll have to take your exam within the month after you get the voucher. So go ahead and register. It will it will take you a couple of weeks to get that voucher back in your email. So don't worry if you don't get to it right away. And then let us know in the chat, if you're here because you're getting ready to take the DP600 test.
And like anything, they're in short supply. So make sure you get in early. You don't want to miss out on that opportunity. But what else we're doing in March? We're all coming together for FabCon plus SQL Con now in Atlanta, Georgia, in the US. I know I'm coming over in person. I'm going to be looking forward to delivering a workshop and a session. So if you haven't checked out the agenda yet, there's still time to sign up. Take this event code, put it in, get $200. I'm pretty sure this is 200 US as well. So make sure you check out and use that code. Don't worry, we'll re-show it at the end. If you need help in justifying to your organization about going, check out the website. There's links to help you with that as well. It is an amazing opportunity. Think 5,000 plus attendees. Then you've got exhibitors from all over the world to tell you about their products, their services, how they can help you. And then, of course, engage with the Microsoft people as well as all the community people. I know, Chris, you'll be there.
I'll be there if you're here because you just want to learn more about, the data warehouse feature of Fabric. Well, you're in luck. Come to FabCon, and I'll be doing a full day workshop with my friend Christina. We'll be going through kind of, the very basics, how you design a schema, all the way up to, what's the best way to get data in there? What are some of the pitfalls that you'll go through? So it should be a great day of learning. Hope to see some of you there.
Now, what are we up to today? We're going to be talking about getting started with Fabric Warehouse. So we did Lakehouse in the earlier session, Event Houses will be in a later session. So this one's all about the warehouse. We're going to load data in. We're going to show you how the options that you can load data, options for querying that data. We'll look at some of the monitoring capability that's available right out of the box, and we'll talk through security. But security in itself, you could do a whole day. And in fact, at FabCon, there is a whole day workshop on it, and there's a white paper. But we're going to touch on it here so that you have a little bit to get you started, and then you can dive further. And we're, of course, live and interactive. Say hi, message in the chat, ask a question.
Yeah, make sure you keep Mike and Taylor real busy.
Exactly. They can't give you voucher codes, though, so don't ask for that. You need to go into the forms and sign up for those. All right, let's get started. Let's talk about the fundamentals, Chris. Take it away.
All right, so these are the main things that we're going to talk about. Data ingestion. How do we get data from our source systems into our warehouse? And then how do we shape and store that data in a format that's optimized for analytics rather than for your business transactional system? We want to make sure that it can be consumed by analytical tools, particularly Power BI. That's our favorite. And then we want to make sure that we know how to analyze that data so it's not just data, it becomes actual information for us. So in order to understand what's going on in a Fabric warehouse, we have to take a little bit step back, look at the whole Fabric ecosystem. We can see at the top, we've got our different experiences. We've got our warehouse experience, which is using T-SQL. We've got our Lakehouse experience, which is using PySpark or Python. We've got our real-time intelligence using KQL. We've got our Power BI data sets. But all of these experiences, they're kind of being underpinned by the data that's in OneLake. And that's our one data lake for the whole of our Fabric capacity. Like, Heidi, you've been in BI quite a long time, right? Just like me. So
Oh yeah.
how much would you say, like in traditional BI, like how much of your job is just moving the data from one place to another?
All the time, all the time. There's always like that one team, that new team pops up. We get data scientists in and they're like, oh, hey, I need this data. And then the owners of the warehouse are like, oh, we can't have them accessing the warehouse. We need to copy the data somewhere just they can access it. Or you get a new integration with a new system and they're like, hey, we need this data. And you're like, okay, we'll go copy it over to you as well. And now I'm like, the introduction of Fabric, way less copying of data. Like those shortcuts, man, just shortcut to data, go leave it where it is, maintain it once. Every team can tap into it. We can still secure them off where they need to be, give them their little access points, but we can make it so that we're not doing massive amounts of engineering anymore. We can just do the required set and focus on other things.
Yep, OneLake was really just a shortwave saying one copy of data in your data lake, but that doesn't look too good on the marketing slides. So I think OneLake is probably a better term for it.
I do like how
Yeah.
they described it as the OneDrive for your data, because it's like a relatable concept. If you're using Word and Excel and Outlook, you're like, this is like the OneDrive for your data. We'll handle all the stuff behind the scenes. You just write your data there and we'll let you access it with the different tooling, but one copy.
Oh, that's pretty good. It's cloud-based. So we've got a portal online. We're in, doing, I would say like 60-70% of my Fabric work is just within the Fabric portal. With within my Edge browser. So you can navigate around, you go into your Fabric workspace. You can choose whether to look at it in sort of the way that, I guess it looks like, I don't want to say old, but let's say the consistent Power BI view. If you're used to working with Power BI, you can look at all your Fabric items in the same way. Or you can't really see it on this screenshot very well, but the bottom left, you can click, switch from Power BI to Fabric view, and then you have kind of a more traditional, you've got tabs. You can have as many things open as you want just within your one browser tab.
Oh,
So
yeah.
the first thing we're going to do, is we're going to go to a new item. We're going to create our warehouse and we're going to give it a snazzy name. And it'll take a few seconds to get set up.
And a good tip for people, the more that they add to Fabric, that every time you click that new item, there's always more and more and more. There's a search. So you can just type warehouse in the search and it'll come up. And if you want the new user experience around multitasking, if you switch that little selector down the bottom right, if you switch that from Power BI to Fabric, you're still in the same interface, but it changes the menu so you get the new multitasking experience. So it'll open up all your items that you have open in a tab, different tabs up the top. So it's really handy to be able to just navigate between like your warehouse. If you want to look at a lake house or you want to look at your Power BI report in a different tab, you can have them all open and you get the option to see them there, because the Power BI one, it would do them vertically on the left and limit to 10. So it's kind of nice to have the tabs up the top. What about designing? Because we know that we can, once we've created a warehouse, we kind of need to design it. We can't just chuck the data in there like it's a storage of no requirements, no governance, no strategy. We can't just throw things in. It's better to give it a bit of a thoughtful design, I think.
Yep. So, and this is what we're looking at. We're looking at this classic star schema where we have a fact table and it's connected relationally to different dimension tables. What's kind of left out on this slide here is you'll hear a lot about medallion architecture, about bronze data, silver data, and gold data. This is sort of the ideal way that you're going to present the gold data. You're going to shape the data in ways that make it much easier for your end users to query. I know we've all probably written queries against our business systems that are joining in 10, 15, 20 tables. It's just awful. It performs very poorly. It's awful to write. But in our data warehouse, our gold layer that's curated, data governed, we're going to set it up so it's as easy to query as possible. So in case you haven't heard those terms, fact and dimension, before, let me explain a little more about those. So our fact tables, they contain the numerical data we want to look at, what we're going to call measures. So we typically have a large number of rows because we have one row per event, right? If you have a sales fact table, each row would be a sale. It might even be an individual, line item product sale within a larger sale. So you can think about, say, how many sales somebody like Amazon goes through. Their fact tables are going to have billions and billions of rows. But those will then be joined to our dimension tables, which contain descriptive information. And they usually have, a lot fewer numbers, right? You think about how do you describe things, where you might describe sales in July. So what does your date table look like? Well, your date table is only, maybe 10, 20, 30,000 rows, depending on how far back you go, compared to the billions of rows in our fact table. It's pretty small. Another way to think about that is the things that are in your fact table. Let's say you're writing a query to analyze your data. You have your select, and in your select, you have things that you're going to do a min, a max, a count on, all those things that you aggregate. Well, that's the numerical measures in your fact table. And the things that you're going to you're going to group by customers, or group by, how many orders in a year. Those things are your your dimensions, or generally your where clause is going to be also things that are dimensional attributes, like orders to, North Texas, for example. So I hope that helps to set the stage a little bit. Heidi, do you have anything to add about the difference between those two?
Well, I was just thinking we got some of those special dimensional tables. So it's like we know that the dimension tables are often used for things like products, anything that's categorical, anything you want to group by. So people don't realize that time is also one of those. So we have the special time dimension that we use quite a lot, where it might be like you've got your calendar dates, you've got your fiscal dates, you might have your quarterly dates breakdown. If you have like week of the year style, I know a lot of companies do, like they want their reporting as at the last day of the week, like on a Friday, or they want their calendar to be not the calendar year, they want it more their fiscal calendar. And that might be, fiscal year rollover in July, it might be fiscal year rollover in August. Every company is different. So we have those time dimensions as well. And then the other one is the slowly changing dimension. Now, people often work with slowly changing dimensions, but they don't know that that's the term for them. So when you think about what a slowly changing dimension is, it's that whole concept of, if you just want one version all the time of your categorical data, you go, right, one version. If it changes over time, we just override the values. If the product name change, we just override it. The code stays the same, override the name. Other times you go, hey, we would like this versioned, and we either want the whole version at a point in time. So we want to know this was the product code, this was the product name, this was what category it fell under, this is the subcategory, this is the distribution point. That can be another version. So every time there's a change, it's a new record in the table, and it's version to say, as at this point in time, we switch from this information to this. And then other times you want to go, well, I don't need to know the full dimensional value. I just need a specific column to be versioned. So then you almost have like multi-value attribute columns, where you're saying this particular column, when it changes, I want a new record for the change of that and nothing else. The rest of the record can be overridden, but this particular column, I need to know historically what it is. So we get those custom sort of special types of dimensions. You'll hear other ones like junk dimension, degenerative dimension. And as analytical engineers, these come up quite a lot. Sometimes you use them without knowing that's the conceptual term. You just go, oh yeah, I need versioning, I need version history, and you implement it. Whether you do things like in SQL tables, we used to do that ledger, or we would just change our ETL process, whether it's store procedure or pipeline based or Python based, and we just change it. So it's like, okay, insert a new record, end off the old record, set the new one to an end date of like null or 9999, and then off we go. Whereas, we don't know that it's conceptually, oh, that's a slowly changing dimension, type 2, type 3, or that's a time dimension. And we can use time dimensions as role-playing dimensions as well, and conform dimensions also come up. So all those different types are things to get familiar with working as analytics engineers. I think, Chris, you can tell us some more about the keys. There's all these keys, business keys, surrogate keys,
Yep.
calculated column.
Before I jump into that, though, we had a good question in the chat from Jawad Quadri 4374, who wants to know how Fabric physically stores the fact and dimension tables in OneLake. So good question. All the tables are stored in a format called Parquet with a layer called Delta on top. So you'll hear it called Delta Parquet or Parquet in the Delta format or just Delta. That all means the same thing. But Parquet is a format. It's like a column store index, right? Or it's like the love child of a CSV file and a column store index. So instead of you think of a CSV file being plain text stored row by row by row, but in Parquet, it's actually stored columnarily. I think that's not quite the right word. It's stored in columns. And by doing that, you actually end up storing a lot of pointers in columns to the actual value. And it really shrinks down the amount of size of your data. It's like it compresses it natively, 5 to 10 times, very, very commonly. And the more kind of common data, the less granular your data is, the more it can compress it. But it it is stored in that format. So the keys we're going to talk about, we set up we set up relationships between the tables in our data warehouse, but we don't use the traditional like foreign keys that we have in SQL that maintain that relational integrity. That's not part of the Parquet specification. So we have to actually manage that ourselves. And actually one way that we're going to do that is with these dimension keys.
And I know Taylor touched on in the chat as well that just for awareness, even though we're all using the OneLake behind the scenes, if you're using files within Lakehouse, those files can be in the format to which they're uploaded. So you can upload, JPEGs, you can upload, text files, Excel files, CSV files. They all go in as straight the file format to which you uploaded them. But then once you're working with them in a table approach, then they're switched into Delta Parquet format. Warehouse is also Parquet format. But then when you use something like Fabric SQL, that takes a similar approach to the Azure SQL database storage. So even though it's on the OneLake, that one is not in Parquet format. Event House, you can also toggle to store that in Parquet format so they can work with it across the full platform. So we have those options when we're working with different files, because Warehouse is the one that works really well with structured and semi-structured data, but we know that people potentially load completely unstructured. And if you do that in files for Lakehouse, they come in the raw format, and then you transfer them into the storage format of recognizing it as a table.
Yeah, and we did mention SQL database and Fabric, but for the DP600 exam, you're probably not going to have to answer any questions on that because it's the analytics engineer. It's very focused on the analytical data stores, the KQL store, the data warehouse, and the lakehouse. So you don't need to worry too much about SQL and Fabric or Cosmos DB and Fabric at this point.
Good call out. Definitely a good call out. Now, I know we've had some changes with Warehouse with keys. I think we've got some indexing that's been added. I know we got like things like materialized views and everything, but under the hood, like when you're working with dimensional keys, what are some of the things they need to consider when they're loading that analytics data?
Well, you want that surrogate key, the key that uniquely identifies the row. You want that to be, or a primary key, for lack of a better term. But you usually want that to be abstract, or surrogate. So, an auto numbering, which which isn't quite available yet, but will be soon. But you don't want that to depend on the value that's in the business system, because the value could change. You could have multiple business systems feeding one dimension, and you have values that are the same in each one. So for those reasons, you want to come up with something something that's abstract but that uniquely identifies the row.
Yeah, and the other
But
reason
then
we
you'll
don't
also want
use
to store your business key as well in the row, so that when you're detecting change. Excuse me, Heidi, can you take over this one while I pop a cough drop?
Yeah, so when we talk about having that, we also want the business key so that we can transition to looking at the data against our original source system. So a lot of the times the data from the source systems is stored against a business key. So we want to keep that natural key available so that if we need to cross-check, because the surrogate key allows us to do the dimensional modeling with the versioning. So then we can look at, hey, for a particular business key, what's the versions over time? And so the surrogate key helps us do that. And also if we want to see the fact data against it, so if we wanted to see the sales records against a particular version, we would put the surrogate key into the fact table so that we're joining on that as opposed to our business key. Because if we join on the business key, then we've got to do additional calculating to go, well, which version of the business key are we looking at? And the reason we do that surrogate key in more of a numeric style, like a simple integer, is also for performance. We don't want business keys that are large contextual text, because that just means we've got to process that text every time. Whereas if we're using things like integers and smaller stored numbers, they're easier and faster to join on and faster to search through. So that's where we use that. And we talked about loading the dimensional tables. Here's a bit of an example around what that looks like. So when you're working with dimensional model data, often you have things that are either like a start and end date, valid from, valid to, you might look at modified dates, you might look at load dates, but there's always that date concept of when is this record valid from, when did it start being used, and when did it stop being used and went to a different version. So anytime you're working with dimensional where it's slowly changing, version history, so from type 2 onwards, those ones you want to look for columns that are like start and end date. And often people put like an is active flag or is current, or current record, so that you can easily filter to that to go, what's the current record today? And the cool thing about this is you can look at the data against the current version by joining on that surrogate key or the business key to get you the latest version, but you can also look at it historically. So you allow, by using slowly changing dimensions, you look at both current and historical. So that's why you use that sort of approach. It's important to know that for the exam, because when you look at the study guide of the different sections, some of them are like, what are the load patterns? And it's load patterns in terms of full and incremental, which we'll talk about in the load section, but also in terms of structuring the data so that you can do current and historical analysis without having to rewrite like a full table design. You're back with us, Chris. Welcome back. Unmute. Anna's probably muted.
Oh, yeah. Heidi, can you go back to that slide? I want to point out one
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
that bugs the heck out of me. We see those two rows where the name of the bicycle turned into super bicycle. Note how the valid to of the first row is the same as the valid from of the second row. I would never
Yes.
do that. I always want to be able to issue a query saying, what was it on this particular day? And if I issue a query saying, what was it on the 31st, I'd get both rows. So yeah, this is, I think, a case where you want to probably put your end date the day before your next start date.
Very good call
Yeah.
out. Definitely
Yeah,
a good
maybe
call out
being a
on that
bit
one.
picky here, but I don't want people to look at these slides and think, well, this is the way to to do it because it was in the one Microsoft presentation.
Definite good call out. And with that, let's talk about loading data, right? So we've talked about designing our warehouse. We've talked about creating our warehouse. Now, how do we get data into our warehouse? For those of you who are new, I think there was like at least 30% of you who hadn't had a chance to watch any of the previous sessions. So when we talk about loading data into Fabric broadly, we often call it extract, transform, load, or extract, load, transform, ELT, ETL. It really depends on the pattern that you need for your organization as to which one you do. And the good about this, and also the bad, is there's about 13 ways to get data into Fabric. You can use just about any technique that you like, whether you're a low-code, no-code citizen developer who just wants a drag and drop interface, you can do that. If you want to be a pro coder and write code and do a bit of vibe coding, you can do that. If you just want to crack open File Explorer and load up files, we've got the OneLake Explorer to be able to do that. So there's lots of options for every persona. But when we talk about loading, we talk about extracting. So how do we connect to the source and select the data that we want to load? Now, there is something to point out here. There is a difference between loading data and accessing data. Anytime we talk about accessing data, we're talking about shortcuts. Anytime we're talking about loading data, we're talking about the variety of items within Fabric that can load and ingest data. So think mirroring, pipelines, Dataflow Gen2. You've also got your notebooks. That's the ones we're talking about when we're talking about actually loading and moving the data. I call that out because it's a very nuanced thing that you can see in some of the questions is when they talk about accessing data, it's more about shortcuts because you're accessing it, you're not loading it in, you're not moving it, you're accessing it where it is. So once we've extracted that data from the source, we want to transform it. We want to do things like, clean the data, get rid of nulls, or we want to replace certain attributes. We want to make sure, like if you're dealing with addressing data, for example, and you have the short notations like ST for street or RD for road, maybe you want to transform that to be all clean and consistent. Or if you want your business codes to have a set format, we can do that. Then we actually load that. We load it into our dimensional modeling space. So we either can load it, say we're doing a medallion architecture, we might load it raw, one-to-one copy, often referred to as bronze, one-to-one source to the Fabric platform. Then we want to transform it into more a business view, a business representation of the data. Because when we were capturing the data, it was all about the operational business need of what data do we need to capture. We need to know what the sale was. We need to know when the sale occurred. We need to know what was sold. We need to know how many and how much it cost. But then when we're doing analytics, we want to look at it in a slightly different way. So we want to model that data into more of a business construct. So often we'll consolidate different tables and go, we'll take 5 different tables like products, categories, subcategories, or we'll take stores and regions and we'll combine them to a more analytical viewpoint. So that's all about where we're doing our loading. And then post the load, we want to do things about optimization. So think about when you're working with Fabric Warehouse, because we've got those Parquet files under the hood, they need maintenance just like any storage solution. So sometimes we'll run commands like vacuum, optimize, and it's all about taking those Parquet files and making them as efficient as possible for what we're using them for. So now that we are talking about loads, let's talk about the types of loads. So the type of loading patterns that we have is both a full and an incremental. These are not the only ones you can do, but these are generally the 2 common ones that get talked about. A full load is where you basically, you're either starting from scratch with a brand new warehouse solution, or something went wrong and you need to reload everything from scratch as well, or you're just doing some testing. Where we do truncate and load. So we're going to truncate all the data out of the warehouse, a clean slate. Then we're going to load the data in from, day dot through to current. And that'll be a longer load time because we are loading all that history from, the day we want through to the current day we're working with, especially if we're doing the versioning over time. So these are always good for an initial load, but from a long-term data warehouse design, you don't want to do full loads every single day because when you start getting into sort of terabyte, petabyte scale territory, doing a full load every day is not exactly possible if your load is going to take more than 24 hours. Not to say Fabric needs 24 hours to load, but your data may be quite large. And that's where we switch to an incremental pattern. So you can design your load to do full, and then you can even have it parameterized and configured to toggle over to an incremental so that you can kind of handle both. So with an incremental load, we're designing it to load smaller data sets each day or each time. That may be every 10 minutes, it may be every hour, it may be every Friday of the week, whatever your schedule may be. But we're incrementing and we're just loading that increment. So it's a much smaller data set every time. It means our ETL load process is much faster because we're not loading as much. We're just loading the difference between the last load and the current load. And of course, we're preserving the history over time. And it's great if you're doing frequent updates because you can dictate when you do the incremental load. You may have the load trigger when a change occurs on the source system. So that's something we can do with Fabric in conjunction with Activator is say when there's a change, I want to kick off my load process and get that latest data loading into the Fabric platform. So it's really good to be able to distinguish the different load patterns. There's no right or wrong answer. You design the load pattern to suit your business, but most often, if you are going to design for incremental, you'll also treat it as if, let's say something went wrong, you do a bit of defensive program, you allow it configurable to be able to toggle a full load if you needed to. Be aware of that. You can also do time traveling within Fabric Warehouse. So if something does go wrong, you have the ability to time travel the data back. Sort of I think out of the box is about 7 days. So you have the ability, without needing to fully load your whole warehouse, you can do a bit of a rewind and go, okay, there was an issue 2 days ago with our load. We're just going to time travel back and redo that bit through to current. So we've got the data in the correct state. We also want to look at staging the data. This is another one that is optional, but there are certain load techniques where staging actually is more performant. And you see it often with Dataflow Gen2, where the data is staged as part of the loading process, and pipelines can also be configured to allow a bit of staging as well. So this is just temporary storage. It's not designed to be there all the time. It's just designed to be there as part of your load process. Stage it so that you can do a bit of transformation and then formally store it in the table. Chris, did you have anything you want to add on that one?
Oh, I just wanted to kind of add to something that Taylor said in the chat, which is we've been talking about ETL, but you will also see ELT. And usually staging is a good example of the ELT because we do the extract from the source systems and then we load it into staging before we do our transforms. So I think a lot of the time, really a lot of the time, I think most of us do ELTL rather than pure ETL or pure ELT. But I think a lot of us, because of the history, just refer to all of that kind of collectively as ETL. It's like the word Kleenex at this point.
Yeah, and I see there's also some conversation in the chat around, hey, but if you don't have any watermark columns, so sometimes those date time columns are considered watermark columns. If you don't have that, then your only option can be to full load. And the way you can design around that is do a full load for that first bit, that sort of source system raw copy in, and then do things like creating a hash record. So you hash each record so you can incrementally diff and go, all right, what did change between the last time I loaded and this? So between that bronze and silver, or bronze and gold, no matter which way you do it. But it can be difficult to set up incremental if your source system doesn't have an increment that you can work with. Sometimes the increment is not dates, it's just ID columns. So you're like, hey, I loaded up to index record number 5. Now I'll load from 6 onward. And that's great until someone goes and backdates and change your record. And then you kind of got to work out, hey, how do I increment based on the change, not increment based on the code? So it can be a little
Yeah,
daunting. But there are
change data capture is a whole other session to get into. All the different ways that you can capture and monitor for change is that's a fun one.
It's a good call out from Taylor. It's not impossible, it's just complicated. And that's absolutely right. Nothing's impossible, it can just be complicated. And sometimes the solution is probably not one you want to do. But if it's the only option, you work with what you've got. And always consider cost. So the decision points, whilst we can do like full and incremental, it's also a decision point around which ingestion method is going to cost for the work that we're doing. So when we look at some of those ingestion options, we've got Fabric pipelines, we've got Fabric Dataflow Gen2. We've also got the option to do cross-database querying, which for those of you who've never used SQL Server, you're probably wondering what is cross-database querying. That's the option for within a warehouse, you can query another warehouse or in fact a lakehouse, because a lakehouse has a SQL analytic endpoint as well. So you can go from a warehouse and query a lakehouse in the same Fabric environment. just with T-SQL by referencing it by its data, it's like lakehouse name plus the schema plus the object name. And then we've got the copy into command. So copy into is really great when you're working with data sitting in a storage account and you want to just take that data from the storage account over to the Fabric warehouse. And so you can use the copy into command, which is another T-SQL command. But with each of those, the decision point around them can be, what's the skill set of my team? If they're low code, no code, drag and drop, then something like a Dataflow Gen2 or Fabric pipeline is good. If you're pro experience with writing T-SQL commands and you're familiar with writing sort of store procedures and functions, then you may want to look at doing cross-database querying or copy into commands. So each time you've got to look at what's the skill set of the team, what's the outcome that I need, and then which item is the cost aversion. I know with a lot of people, if you're just raw copying in, so you're taking a source system and copying it in, sometimes pipeline is the best one for that, because you can do it metadata driven, easily configurable, and then handles just bulk copying of data as opposed to like a notebook where you've got to write a programming experience. You can do metadata driven with that as well, but it can be a differentiator. But then when you want to do transformation, if you're doing heavy transformations, then it might be better to do notebook and go with a pro code approach. If you're transitioning from Power BI, where you did your get data experience, straight into Dataflow Gen2 is a good way to start because the experience is very familiar to you. It's slightly different in that, yeah, you're going into the interface in the Power BI service and you're going into get data, but from that point on, you've got the Power Query steps and everything, so you get a familiar. And one thing we point out is there's also the option of clone. So cloning within Warehouse allows you to basically copy the metadata of a table as another table, but leave the data there. So you can effectively copy a table and go work with it. Why you might want to do that is if you're doing development testing purposes, or you might be doing, you've had an issue with your ETL load and you need to look at the data at a point in time. And the cool thing with clone is it's not just restricted to a table. So if you needed to clone the combination of tables, then you can use that. Oh, and I see there's a question in the chat around hashing. So you can use the hash function in a lot of programming languages and technologies to be able to create a identifier for a series of data points. So some people used to like concatenate all the columns of a row together, and then they would hash that value, and that creates a unique identifier. And then when you're doing a comparison on your transforms, you can compare the hashes as opposed to trying to compare every single column to every single column. You can just compare a full hash of a record. We won't go into a depth, but that's sort of the concept I was going over there. When we talk about pipelines, this is an example of a pipeline. So this is a little bit similar to Azure Data Factory, but not exactly the same. So when you go in and you say get data within the warehouse experience and you pick pipeline, you get the option of doing like a wizard copy data experience. So you pick your source. Once you've picked your source, you pick the tables or the objects that you want to copy, and then it'll go through and it'll create the pipeline activities for you. And each activity is designed to create an action that occurs. So it's copying the data from a source to a destination. We can also schedule those to run on a schedule. So it can either be on a time-based thing or on an event-based trigger. And we can make them parameterized. So if we wanted to do dynamic or metadata-driven loads, we can do that. And we can also delete data. So if we needed to do a full load, we can delete the data first, load the data in, and use it as a reusable pipeline. The copy data assistant allows us to do a wizard experience to do that. So we go through and we can select. And the reason this is really good to see is you'll notice that it says sample data on the screen. If you're trying to do a bit of exploratory proof of concept work, Fabric includes built-in sample data sets. So when you create warehouses, you can create them with a sample data set that allows you to try it out without you having to generate any data. If you're working with the copy data assistant, you can do the same thing. So you can go, look, I just want to see what this experience is going to look like. So I can use copy data and pick something like the New York City taxi company, 2 gigabytes worth of data, and you can load that into your warehouse and see how it performs and operates. So it's a great way to try it out, especially using the Fabric trials. So use the Fabric trial, try out the features, work out which one is going to be the best option for you and your team. And then last but not least, the ones we're going to explore today is Dataflow Gen2, not to be confused with Dataflow Gen1, which is a Power BI item type. I got to say the Gen2 is very much a step into the future and a step up in terms of both performance and optimization, but also cost, the improvements in cost. And one of my favorite things, it can be version controlled and put in source control. So hello, Git repository, it can be put in there. So you've always got a copy of what you built. And of course, you can also use the Copilot experience to help you write. And Copilot is available with a lot of these. If your tenant is configured to use it, then you can use Copilot to help you develop these. So you're not totally on your own. If I'm not sure how to write a Power Query step, I can use the Copilot feature to say, hey, I'd like to transform this column. I'd like to split it based on the comma and have it go across multiple columns. And I can use the Copilot experience to do that. So we connect to our data, we can append or replace the data. So we can do our full load, we can do our incremental. We can also do different destinations and they can go across workspaces as well. So if you're designing to have your load processing in one workspace to use one capacity and then your storage in another workspace, Dataflow Gen2s are also good for that. Once you've designed your Dataflow Gen2, then you publish it. Once you publish it, then you can start refreshing it so that the data is being loaded in all the time. Whereas a Dataflow Gen1 would sort of load it into memory as soon as you publish, it's available. Whereas Gen2 allows you to work with it, and then when you publish and run it, you're refreshing the data in a storage solution like the warehouse. We've got our data, but we want to query it. There's a few options for querying, right, Chris? Toggle the unmute.
Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, I was just saying we've got quite a few options. Let's see which one is on the first slide. Oh, so we have a built-in SQL query editor right in the Fabric GUI. So this is a lot like using Management Studio or the dearly departed Azure Data Studio. We can write our query. We've got our Explorer on the left pane. We've got IntelliSense available. We've got code completion. We've got validation. Some things to remember here. We can only return 10,000 rows to the grid at a time. So if you're writing a query, say for export, and you're going to be more than 10,000 rows, well, then you'll need to use Management Studio. Also, every query that you issue is a brand new session, which if you're working with temp tables leads to some interesting experiences. But yeah, overall, you've got a pretty full-featured, query editor, right in your browser. All right, what's next?
I think you covered that one pretty well. So we'll go into
Yeah, so we've also got a visual query editor for those people who would rather kind of drag and drop to build the queries. So maybe this is some of your super users that aren't as well versed in SQL as your kind of pro developers, but understand, the concepts of relationships and how tables are joined together. So they can do, drag and drop, choose from a list, just a very good, graphical query interface. They can also then actually save the results as a table or as a view to be, used again. And you've got all the stuff, as it says there. You can group by, anything you can do in regular SQL. Yeah, you can do. As we talked about, you can export from there. I know it's a little tough to see the scale, but yeah, you can export right from the grids. You can download them as Excel files. Again, just be wary of that 10,000 row limit, though.
Yeah, and I know some people in the chat. I'm with you, Taylor. I miss Azure Data Studio already, but you can use Visual Studio Code as well to connect to the SQL Analytic endpoint and use that. You can even use your database projects if you come from a SQL background, Azure SQL, and you're familiar with database projects. They work with it too, so you can have some queries and some snippets pre-done and leverage the tools that you've loved with the other experiences in the Azure data world with the Fabric world, which is pretty cool. And if you're wondering how you connect, like here's all the details. Chris, you want to take us through like how people can actually connect to that warehouse?
Yeah, so just because you're in the cloud in your Fabric, just because that GUI query is available, doesn't mean you can't still use Management Studio. And that's what I'm using for most of my querying every day, and actually for most of my T-SQL development as well. So you just need to make sure that your authentication type is the universal with MFA. You can get your connection string by going to the settings for your data warehouse. And there's a place where you can hit the little button to copy the long string into your clipboard, and then you paste that in the server name. You'll pick the right authentication, put in your username, and then a regular kind of Azure Enter ID, password prompt will pop up.
I always love the comment I hear out in the community. Everything you ever want is behind the 3 little dots. 3 little dots, properties, it's there. 3 little dots, coffee connection string, it's there. And for those of you who work in networking and network restrictions in your company, you'll note that the end of the URL is datawarehouse.fabric.microsoft.com. So make sure if you've got network controls in place that you're allowing that endpoint. And all the endpoints that Fabric use are published online on the docs. So if you do need to do some network changes to support it, those are available in the docs. So you can submit those to your security teams and your network teams. And we can also visualize the data with our tried and true Power BI, of course.
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, a lot of times, that's not going to be, something that the developers fall in. But as soon as you create, a semantic model, you've got the ability to just drag and drop, create really great looking reports. Yeah, again, right in the GUI. Yeah, you don't need Power BI Desktop to do this. It's right within, the warehouse space.
And I guess one of the important things that we've got is how do people actually monitor this solution? And I guess when we're talking about monitoring, we're talking about like the consumption that's happening for our Fabric warehouse, the queries that people are running, what's taking so long to load, what's going on with the platform, how do we do the tuning?
All right, so what we have to know here is, first off, anything that we're doing, we're using up these things called capacity units, which is kind of an abstract concept. But I think the documentation says each CU is essentially half of a warehouse vCore. So we can use the capacity metrics app. Now we have to be an admin to install it, and that's a capacity admin rather than a tenant admin. So as long as you're a capacity admin on your Fabric capacity, you can install it. A lot of times you'll want to, say, filter by activity type to warehouse here, and you're tracking primarily your reads and writes and how many CUs. You might have an F8 capacity. You're expecting that your average workload is 8 CUs. All right.
And I guess there's different operations when they're looking at these, because obviously the CUs is going to report, that capacity metrics is reporting against every different Fabric item in the workspace, not just their warehouse.
Yeah, so the warehouse query is how long the actual query engine is taking to resolve the query. The OneLake piece is about getting the data into, or usually when you're querying out of OneLake, to be available for the engine to query. And you'll note that we also have the SQL endpoint here. So if you're using a lakehouse, but you're using the SQL endpoint to query the warehouse using, say, T-SQL, that is going to show up in the capacity metrics app under that warehouse that you've already filtered for. And I've included a little link here so you can go learn more from the Learn docs.
And I think that they're discussing this in the chat, but we can narrow down to like a point in time. This is a Power BI report that has a series of inbuilt filtering already, but we can go in and filter to a specific, like if there's a spike in the CU usage, we can go in and look at that in more detail and find out exactly what's happening on the platform.
Yeah, one thing you're going to use a lot for that is looking at this explore graph. You can see the line at 100% is your regular your regular capacity. The blue is the background CUs that are running, and the red is actual user queries. Now note that we've got some spikes that go over 100% because we can burst, and as long as we're not going over the average of our capacity, you can see, Leah, looking at the average of this, we're probably running at about half of our our available CUs. So we're probably in a pretty good place with our sizing here. But if you look at this graph, I'd say the average is way down to 10% or so, then you've probably got a bigger capacity than you need.
And it's really good to work with your capacity, because the capacity can have more than one workspace, but a workspace can only have one capacity. So you do want to look at these things and optimize both your workspace allocations to capacities appropriately, but your capacity sizing. And I know there's been some talk in the chat around the licensing. If you're looking at F64, that covers your Power BI Pro consuming in the same way a Power BI Premium P1 and above did. But everything else, if you're doing the Power BI items, you need the Power BI Pro license, but all the Fabric things are licensed by the capacities. So they're covered in that regard.
So we've got some things to think about here. If you're doing cross-database reporting, I believe it's only going to show up as the initial database and not other databases that you've joined to. So that may be a little misleading at first. We've also got, you can, there's actually a whole Learn module on these, but we have some dynamic management view queries that you can use. So if you've used, excuse me, DM exec requests in the inbox product, that's available as well. That can show you what's going on right now. You've got a schema called Query Insights that shows you which queries are run a lot. So yeah, the like the sys.dm exec shows you what's going on now, where the Query Insights give you a longer time period. But also just keep in mind when you're querying these things or when you're looking at the capacity metrics, just doing that also uses some of the CUs against your capacity.
Yeah, and definitely a
then
good
also,
call out. Definitely a good call out on those
Yeah.
dynamic management views, because you need to understand which ones allow you to see which information. So if you needed to say, look at, hey, there was spikes over time, what was the query that was used? Some of those views will actually show you the query, and some of them will show you the session, some of them will show you the user. So different ones have different use cases.
Yeah, and then always keep in mind that the duration field is about how long the query processing is taking, not necessarily how long it's taking to render back to the browser. Right? So if you're waiting a long time, it might just be it's taking forever to get your 10,000 rows of 120 columns to get all that data coming back to your browser. That won't be captured in the duration, just the processing piece.
And we could spend a whole day on monitoring. It is in itself, it's a full day to go through the different monitoring techniques. So definitely dive into that more, and don't treat monitoring as an afterthought. Really, as you're building out your solutions in Fabric and working with it, think about monitoring, how you're going to monitor your solutions from the get-go, so that you'll be able to watch for those spikes and adjust your capacity, or look at reserve pricing for capacities to keep your cost optimized. And the other thing we need to cover is security. Now, security, it's important to be aware that whilst there's a lot of security enhancements, Fabric has had security since day one. A lot of people confuse that Fabric didn't have some security because they saw one security, universal security in the roadmap, but that's more enhancements to the security. We've got things like role-based access controls. We can do SSL encryption. We have the different encryption keys, of course, being in the Fabric platform with single sign-on. We've got the ability to use Entra's multi-factor authentication, as well as integrate with Entra in terms of like our workspace identities become available in Entra. We've also got the ability to use conditional access policies and to partner up with Entra to restrict access to our Fabric tenant through those means. But one of the ones to be mindful of is security in layers. So it starts with the tenant. goes in the capacity. We've got tenant admins, capacity admins. We've got things like private links, private endpoints. Once we're in the capacity, we then go into Workspace. We've got our Workspace security. That's the container for our items. We can grant access at the role level, access at the Workspace level, I should say. We've only got the 4, so admin, contributor, member, and viewer. Very nuanced between contributor and member. Often the difference is that the member can modify the security, the contributor cannot. And in one, they can do the app. The other ones cannot. So be mindful of what those give you, or that the viewer gives you access to the SQL Analytic endpoint. So it's being mindful of that is at a Workspace level. But then you can go at an item level using the sharing capability. So when you share a different item, you've got security on that sharing. So you don't have to give people access to the Workspace. You can go at an item level and share the item. And then when you're sharing the item, each item type has a slightly different security profile. So for the most part, you'll have the options to do read data, and read all. They won't appear as that on the menu. It'll say something like, hey, do you want to provide access to the SQL Analytic endpoint? Or would you like to give access to be able to use Spark against this? Or would you like to give access to connect but not actually read any of the data? Under the hood, what that's providing is read data, read all. So when you're looking at the itemized permission management in the permission screens, you're going to see these. You're going to see read data, and read all. But they translate to a more textual label representation. So read, connect, read data, ability to query the SQL endpoint, read all, ability to use Spark. So they do have different connotations when we go in. But it's not the only security. So once you do item, you can even do in-item security. Fabric itself, inside the warehouse, row level security, column level security, object level security. You can even do schema level security, which is different slightly to Lakehouse. We can even do data obfuscation. So that we do with dynamic data masking, which is the ability to modify the data on read so that the information is obscured. It is on read, so it's not on write. The data is stored in its clear text version, but when you're looking at it in terms of querying it, you can restrict what users can see. So you can say, hey, they can only see the last 4 digits of the credit card and the rest all appear as X's, and you get to pick the masking function that you apply. So those are some things to be mindful of. But when you do dynamic data masking, because it is on read, think about how that's going to work in your reporting, because some of the capability, like a semantic model, if you do import mode, that is of course using one security profile to import the data, which means it's either going to be masked or unmasked depending on which profile you use. So be mindful of dynamic data masking. What's your end state? What's your next step? Because if you mask it on read, then it's going to affect the downstream system. So you have to be mindful of how's that going to work with your user base. With our row level security, because we're not going to talk about all the security that we can do, column, row. With row level security, we can restrict the access to specific rows based on a security policy and a function. So I could say, hey, user querying this database, I want to cross-check if the user is in this particular role, they can see this category or this set of regions, and I use the security functions to be able to do that. And I can apply that function to a table so that I can restrict access to the rows within a table. When you do this, if you're working with Power BI semantic models and reports, that will eliminate the use of direct link because it is using a security feature. It'll fall back to direct query. But generally speaking, row level security is really good to restrict access to the data as users query it so that they can't see particular rows that they're not supposed to. So it's something to consider when you're building out your data analytic solutions. As an analytical engineer, what is the persona security model that you need? And is it appropriate to do it on the warehouse, or do you want to do it on, say, the Power BI semantic model? Or do you want to just do it within views? Within the warehouse, it really depends on how you're going to be designing out your end state for your users, because sometimes you want a combination of row level security on the warehouse for that ad hoc querying. You want to maintain the security. You may also double up and put it on the semantic model as well, or just put it on the semantic model, and that's your consuming point. Let's talk about resources, because we've covered a lot of content, but we need to make sure, where do they go next? What do they do?
Yeah, I think we have time pretty much just to show this one slide and, get your cameras out to get those QR codes. I know we're a few minutes over, but just get ready for the DP600 exam. If you get the voucher, you'll have to take it next month. So, you've got to run through this checklist, very quickly. You got to get that exam scheduled, get your hands-on practice, maybe through some of the Learn modules, take your practice assessments. And then all we can really say is good luck.
Yeah, I know there was
Uh,
at least like 25% plus of people who were saying they were ready to go. So definitely get those vouchers, get it scheduled. You can reschedule up to, I think it's like 24 hours before you schedule. So life gets in the way, just reschedule, but make sure you do it in that month. Use the voucher. And hey, if you don't pass the first time, that's okay. You've now learned a bit about the exam, you've given you to go, and you can retry it. You can take the exam again. It's not like one and done and you failed and you can't do it again. You can resit the exam. So don't be afraid to give it a go because you'll now know what you did well and what you didn't at a high level, and then you can focus your learning and go at it again.
Yeah, and in in previous series on this same channel, we've actually done some sessions about specifically how to prepare for the exam. So go back and just go to the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel and just search for DP600 preparation. And I think there's going to be at least 4 videos with different people covering the material, different ways that they prepare.
Yeah, and I know I want
Uh,
to give a huge shout out to all our support team behind the scenes. We've got Anna, our producer. We got Pam in the chat from Microsoft. We got Mike Carlo helping us out moderate. We got Taylor's Amy helping us out moderating in the chat. And I'm sure some of our mates would have popped in as well to help out. And of course, Chris, thank you once again. I have loved delivering this session to you. I know we did one last year and we got to do one this year. Hopefully we can do one next year as well.
yep.
Thank you all for joining, and thanks again to our speakers. This session is part of a series. To register for future shows and watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen or in the chat. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find that link on the screen or in the chat. And we'll see you at the next one.